anyways, I had a really well-rehearsed intro, but we'll just say that was not it. CSS often gets really underestimated as an animation tool, and I think that's kind of sad because knowing CSS animation and understanding it can really save you a lot of time and effort if you ever have to animate anything on the web. I mean, it only works on the web, but CSS, kind of the only place it lives. But if you need to do that, CSS has like the lowest barrier to entry of all of our options, and it kind of has a lot of power. Like, actually does have a lot of power. I sort of have this theory that like, or actually I'm going to show you some of the power of it, and we're going to talk a little bit of technical stuff, a little bit of design stuff, a little bit of code, that kind of thing, and a little bit of design. And I sort of have this theory that like the people who wrote the actual CSS specification, especially the 3 specifications that have to do with animation, I think they wanted to keep it a secret. And I know I just met you guys, and I sound completely insane saying that. So yeah, but really, because we have these 3 specifications, right? We have transforms, transitions, and animations. Those are all words that sound like they could mean the same thing. They could do the same thing. All of those kind of sound like they make something move. And you're like, okay, only 2 of them make the move. I can eliminate one for you. Transforms don't make anything move. Nice try. Good for you, transforms. You don't make anything move. So we have transitions and animations, and both of those things actually cause animation according to the dictionary, because the dictionary, and like all humans, define animation as something moving over time. They both do that. Only one of them is actually called animation. So what's the deal with that? See, totally trying to keep it a secret. But I'll show you what I mean with a cat, as is required of me by internet law. You are not allowed to demo anything that has to do with HTML or CSS if you don't use a cat. If you've ever tried it, you've probably got a fine in the mail. It's really large. Anyways, this is my cat, Cyril. He's a grumpy old man, as you can tell from his beautiful model photo. But if we wanted to do some things, like if we wanted to use a transition to actually make some stuff move, transitions are like our easiest way of making stuff move in CSS. And we can't really do anything at all unless we actually like give it some kind of 2 states to work with in CSS, because we don't want to like write any JavaScript or anything. We stick with hover. I called him Kitten just to suck up to him, so maybe he'll be nice to me when I get home. And if we want him to do something, we might tell him to like transform and maybe like, I don't know, scale by like kind of a little bit if that's cool with you. There's an S in transform. Sorry. And then that on its own isn't really going to do anything at all because I haven't actually told it to transition anything. So we'll be like, hey, Mr. Kitten guy, if you don't mind. Oh, God, I can't even spell kitten. You guys. I swear I do this for a living. Oh, no. This is my favorite way to code because it's like if I make a mistake at home, no one says anything. I mean, you think Cyril says anything if I make a spelling mistake, but you guys laugh. It's awesome. Anyway, so we say we want you to transition. It just gets worse and worse. And we're like, transition your transform. Yeah, we don't sound crazy saying that. And maybe take like 0.3 seconds and just like ease that stuff out if that's cool with you. And then if we refresh him, we're like, mouse over him, we're like, yay, he gets bigger, but that's not dramatic enough. I mean, come on, we're on a big screen, let's make that bigger. And now it's like, all right, you were really scaling up. And that's pretty sweet, like it's a transition, it's actually animating, things are changing over time even though it's a transition, but whatever. It's between 2 states, we're kind of happy about it. If you've ever had to write your own mouse over in like JavaScript or ActionScript, you're probably like crying right now because it took a lot more than 2 lines of code. And it does both in and out, right? Yeah, that's the magical part. Anyways, that's transitions. It's kind of it's super powerful actually, but what if we wanted him to do more than just go between like 2 different places? That's where our animations actually come in. And to write animations in CSS, we use keyframes because, well, why would we just call them animations? That'd be silly. And you need to make a list of keyframes and give it a name. And that list of keyframes can actually be as long as you can possibly imagine. You're allowed to, like, usually you go from 0 to 100%, and you are allowed to use decimal places, so it's effectively infinite. The biggest limit really is your patience to write them. And I've learned that it's true, like how much are you going to type out? But I've learned that when you're in front of, like, say, more than 100 people, you should limit yourself to 2 keyframes. Total rule of thumb. So we're going to go from, we're going to attempt to spell transform correctly this right time. That sort of looks like it worked. We're going to say like translate on the y-axis, I don't know, like 100 pixels, that sounds pretty. And then go to, crazy keywords, not going to have any idea what this is going to do. And we'll do the same sort of thing. We'll transform, oh goodness. Y, and we'll do basically go from somewhere lower than you are to go and then go to where you are now. That on its own does absolutely nothing. Once again, I'm saying this a lot, I'm like, that doesn't do anything. You wrote a long list of keyframes, 2 lines, whatever. Let's pretend I wrote a bunch more. but nothing will actually happen yet until you actually tell Mr. Cyril the kitten to animate stuff. So we'll get rid of this transition because there's nothing to transition anymore. And we'll be like, animation, maybe use the slide one. I don't know, take like a second, that sounds cool. And we'll just ease that out again because that sounds like a good idea. And then when we refresh him, he slides. 100 pixels was a terrible choice. Who let me do that? Let's try 300. That's better. All right. But it's sort of like, great, he did it once. Thanks, dude. That was really helpful, Cyril. You're doing great. So maybe we'll just tell him to do this like infinitely. Infinite, it's a really hard word to spell, and then he can do that over and over. And it's kind of annoying because it repeats in a strange, awkward way. So we'll be like, okay, just do that like alternate reverse if that's cool with you. And then he's like, all right, back and forth, I got it, dude. Because my cat calls me dude, that makes any sense at all. But like, you know, we can do some fun things like that, and we can get even crazier with it if we wanted to. Like we could, I don't know, maybe make him rotate. Like 2 turns. Oh, he's going to hate me. And maybe we'll rotate this. He has to start at 0 because you need to have like those 2 places. And then this is going to get a little ugly. Helps if you save it first. I have what? Oh! There we go. Maybe. Rotate. It's not 2 turns. There's only 2. Oh my goodness. See, you try to show off a little bit and you just screw everything up. And my point was to make something incredibly ugly, and like Cyril, he's probably puking up all of his cat food right now. It's actually making me a little dizzy. And we made something totally ugly, even though my whole point is to not make something ugly. But that's still like, for a few lines of CSS, I mean, that's all we wrote, and we're really messing with that cat. Thankfully, we can also use this to do less terrible and annoying things. Oh, you know what I forgot to do? That whole mirroring displays thing. Dun, 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 unmirror. That's the unmirroring song. Do you guys sing it too? No? All right, never mind. All right, so there's some extra slides. So, you know, we did a whole lot there with Cyril, made a big mess of him, and I'm going to get in a lot of trouble when I get home. But we did sort of prove a couple of things here. There's some serious advantages to using CSS. There's a really low barrier to entry. We can mess with our cats in just a few lines in like 5 minutes. And if you weren't being watched by a bunch of people, you would have spelled that all correctly the first time around, and it would have taken like half the time. Another really good advantage is reusableness. You know, I was joking about how long you can make your keyframes, your list of keyframes, but if you keep them to be a really short list, you find that you can reuse them on multiple things, and they become very modular. Like if you write one set of keyframes, if we had like 10 cats, like if I was a crazy cat lady and I had 10 cat pictures, I could apply that same animation to all 10 cats, and I would never have to write any more keyframes, and then we really would have made someone throw up. It would have been great. And then performance. That's one that it gets called out a lot. A lot of people are like, you know, CSS animation is way more performant than all our other options. And that's sometimes mostly true because effectively the browser is doing everything it can. It's doing all the work, really, for CSS animations, right? There's no like extra library. The browser's doing all the work, and it's trying to do it as efficiently as possible. So normally, and in under like perfect circumstances, yes, CSS animations are probably more performant than like JavaScript, maybe. But there's this thing about humans. We can write really bad code. I mean, I never do it, obviously, clearly, never do it. And you guys never do it, but other people do. And if you try and animate something like height, let's say, that is a very, very expensive property to animate in the browser, it doesn't matter what you use to animate that with, it's probably going to look pretty crusty. It's like, it's just not going to happen. So it comes with a big, huge asterisk, because yeah, there's some performance advantages, but it evens out in the end, and it's really more about making smart choices. So the thing CSS is most best at, because that's how you say English, is best at for animating, the types of animations it really shines with, are animations that have predetermined motion. You know, you saw in that set of keyframes we created, we said go from a very specific place to another very specific place. And you can get a little bit relative with that, but you can't ever change those 2 places. Once you write those, they're there. That's where it's going. If you were like, hey, I wanted you to change your mind halfway through, it's not going to happen without a huge headache, and you should probably just use something else. It's really good at animating between 2 states. That's both the transitions, like we saw with that little hover, and he's like, woo, I'm a huge cat now. With that, and also animations are really good at going, like the keyframe animations are good at going from one state to the other. You know, if you have a situation where you're like, well, sometimes it should go over there, sometimes it should go over there, and sometimes it should do that. Like if you're ever doing this to describe your animation, CSS is probably not your best choice, unless you like a lot of extra work. And it's really good at having reusable motion. I think I say that like 4 times in the next 2 slides, like as some kind of metaphor, or maybe I just repeat myself, not sure. We can get kind of modular with it, and we'll look at that in our little example too. There's more cats to come, don't worry. It's not so good at dynamic motion, like I mentioned, things that have to change. It's not very good at anything that has a large number of states, and it's not very good at physics. I do this like online Hangouts Q&A with a friend of mine every once in a while, and like every time there's the first like trolley question in the chat room we get is someone who's like, why would I ever do CSS animation? It can't even do physics. And it's strange that they talk in a Mean Girls movie voice. But aside from that, it's like, on one hand, you just want to be like, oh my God, shut up. But really, that's not the correct answer. I mean, it's something you want to do. You want to animate and have physics. It's a thing. But when you kind of get to that, there's an assumption there that they're sort of missing, and it's an easy one to miss. Is usually we animate stuff with programming languages, and we can do things like model gravity and add drag and all that kind of stuff. CSS is a markup language, not a programming language. So it has no idea about that stuff. It just can't do it. And that tends to be like a thing that a lot of us get hung up on. And I know I do sometimes too. I'm like, why can't I do this? Oh yeah, you're a markup language. Sorry, CSS. So yeah, it can't do, there's a lot of things it can't do, but it has friends for that. CSS is kind of nothing on its own, right? Without its pals, HTML and JavaScript, it's like, it basically doesn't exist. Especially JavaScript is really great at doing logic and knowing what kind of interaction is happening. CSS knows like hover and maybe like focus and target, kind of. That's all it's got. But JavaScript is really good at that. So using it with other things is totally acceptable. Like as much as it's cool on the internet to make pure CSS things, when you're doing real work, making JavaScript and CSS work together is pretty awesome, and they're good friends. And there's nothing wrong with having JavaScript do your logic and CSS do the motion. And it's actually a pretty good mix of things. So taking a little break from technical stuff for a second. I'm going to say, I think it was Robert who said it yesterday that he didn't really like animation. I totally love animation, so we're opposite on that. I actually think designers should use animation more, especially on the web. I think people who design and build for the web should use animation more. Because it's a really powerful and like just great design tool that really gets ignored. And when I say things like I want to see more animation on the web, people just like, have this reaction that I mean stuff like this. Are you going to play? Oh yeah, of course you are. I'm not done yet. Yeah. I mean, I thought I was scrolling, and they're like, no, things, look at stuff. And it's just awful. But like, this is what, when you think of web and animation, you think of like skip intro, you think of banner ads, and then you think of, I don't know what that is. You think of that. But that's not what I mean. I mean stuff like this. This is Stripe checkout, which you might have used if you've ever, signed up for ProDribble accounts or anything else like that. They actually went and redesigned their entire checkout process. And their whole goal in doing it is they wanted to create a product that felt very trustworthy and very sophisticated. And they decided they were going to get that across mostly with animation. That was going to be their main design mechanism for getting those feelings across. And they do a really good job. I mean, if you went and counted all the animations in that GoChat thing, and you counted all the animations getting through Stripe checkout, you might end up at the same total. I haven't added it up, but it's pretty close. But like these animations, even though there's a lot of them, they have purpose, they have style, they're there for a reason, they've been designed and considered, and that makes a huge difference, because without that, you have GoChat. And it's his friends, I don't know, whoever else does that. They're not the only ones. So really good animation has 2 parts to it. It's placed very well, it has purpose and utility, and it has style. I'm going to focus more on talking about style because I've been here the last couple days. You guys, oh my God, I just said use guys. Oh, that's horrible. You guys are super smart. Clearly I'm not. So I think you can handle the purpose part yourself. So we'll go walk through a quick little demo, which of course has cats. Once again, don't want to get fined. So this is our starting point. We have some content that is animating onto screen. I chose content that's confirming my appointment to go hang out with cats and drink tea at a cat cafe. For you, that might be like some part of a news story or some data point or something like that. Content animating on screen happens a lot. For me, required to use cats, like I said. But we're basically at the point here where we've just quite literally animated it on. We're like, hey, do a little animation and slide in, fade up, that's it, I'm done. It animated onto screen. That's all we've got. We're like, what else could we possibly consider? Heck of a lot more. And then we have our section animation here, and then our little keyframes to have it slide in, which actually looks remarkably what I wrote for Cyril. I'm going to pretend that was foreshadowing and totally on purpose. So you have some animations there, and there's some pretty basic stuff. But we could probably do a little bit more than that, right? We took all that time to animate it on, and we had no real purpose or reason for doing it. We're just like, yep, it's gonna animate on. So that's the point where we want to start thinking about some animation principles. And strangely enough, animation has existed for a really long time. There's people who've been doing it for like decades and decades, and there's a ton of stuff they've learned about it. People wrote some books about it. Maybe you've heard of Disney. If you haven't heard of Disney, you've probably seen the Tumblr about it, which actually is a really good summary of the points of that book, I have to say. And it's not just like, for Tumblr, that's some quality content right there. But it's pretty well known, if you've read some things about animation or either of those things, that there are 12 principles of animation. 12 is a pretty big number. I only have half an hour, so I'm not going through all 12. And honestly, the whole list of 12 doesn't really apply to us as people who are animating with computers on screen. I mean, these were mostly the people who came up with them were mostly old men drawing like Mickey Mouse frame by frame. Smart guys, very talented, but not everything they had to say applies to us. So I'm going to take 3 of them from the list of 12 and apply them to our little example to show you how we can make it better. The first one is timing. I don't know, timing is like the key to comedy. It's basically the key to like everything, I think. It's definitely the key to animation. It's kind of like if there is no other principle of animation you ever understand or know, that's the one to do. And according to the super smart old guys at Disney, timing is the thing that makes objects appear to obey the laws of physics. Obviously, they don't really, because in film and on computer screens, there is like no gravity or anything like that. So it's not real physics. It's appearing to have physics, appearing to obey the law of physics. A kind of more nuanced definition of timing, and sometimes this part of timing is called spacing, is the idea that timing also conveys things about the emotion and intention of the thing that's moving. Something that moves really fast has a lot of energy. Something that moves really slow might be heavier. Maybe it's sluggish. Maybe it's tired. We have this tendency to kind of humanize everything we see, and we try to figure out why it's moving the way it is. So as designers, we should maybe put the why in there instead of just picking things randomly. So timing is super important, but if you've ever looked at the CSS timing functions, you'll notice we have a very short list. So that's 5 things to cover all that important, really good communication ground. Yeah, probably not looking like it's going to work so well. That's why we have a thing called cubic Bezier, which is basically what saves CSS animation and makes it something you can actually use if you care about how things look, which of course you all do. I usually describe cubic Bezier functions as being number barf. But I assume most of you look at a list of 4 comma-separated numbers and see 2 x, y coordinates, because you're super smart, and that's exactly what they are. They're basically the 2 black points there, those 2 control points of where those are. When you look at a motion graph of CSS, easing, when we plot the progression of the animation against time, with the CSS easing functions and cubic Bezier functions we can use, start and end are fixed, and we just change those 2 control points to get different curves. And it's pretty cool. We can get a whole lot of things. This is what allows some people who did more work than us and were smarter, or did some work for us, really, to do things like get the equivalent of the Penner easing equations in CSS as well. So they've already figured out the cubic Bezier values you need for those. You don't have to do any work. Or if you want, you can go crazy and make your own custom cubic Bezier curve by dragging the handles. Extra office fun. You can race 2 different kinds of easing against each other. Fun trick. Spoiler alert, it's always a tie. But if your coworkers aren't here, you could totally get a free coffee out of that. So everything is better than cubic Beziers, better with cubic Beziers, pizza, cereal, whatever, especially animation. So let's do some cubic Bezier, cooking show style, and we'll pick one for our little message box guy. I picked that one. Off the top of my head, I was like, oh yeah, it needs 0.157. No, that's not how I picked it. And this is what he looks like with that easing. It's looking a lot better so far. And that's the curve of the easing that we use. You'll notice it actually goes up past its destination and back. So I've been really sneaky and actually just used 2 animation principles besides 1. When you go and overshoot your destination, it's called follow-through. And basically the idea is that you have so much energy, you pass by where you were going and you're like, oh yeah, I'm back. And just doing that little bit, which we can totally do just by changing our easing function, which is kind of amazing, we just get that more energy of like, oh, I'm so excited to show you your reservation, yay! And it really changes things, even though he's still probably moving a little too slow. And I put him there twice, not really sure why. So what I like to do as a nice trick is set my cubic Beziers to be Sass variables, partly so I can look really smart. See, that looks way cooler, doesn't it? Yeah. And also because this is a heck of a lot easier to read than a bunch of lists of cubic Bezier numbers. Like, I know what those are. I know when I'm reusing the same one. I read words better than numbers, personally. So let's get to number 3, which would be secondary action. And this is one web designers have a tendency to really totally ignore, and it makes me kind of I don't know, I sort of laugh about it. Have you ever seen like a sliding carousel on websites, and there's like a photo and text and like a box behind the text, and they all move together like this, and then they like go off? And like the text and the image both leave the screen and then they come right back on in the same place, and you're like, why are they all moving together like they're attached? They're separate things, right? So it's really a secondary action of the idea that any supplemental action to the main action. So that's things like, usually when they talk about cartoon characters, it's like if the cat was walking and his tail's wagging. I guess you would do that more with a dog than a cat, but like I said, fines. With a cat, that's a bad thing. With a dog, it's a good thing. Just that secondary stuff that is reinforcing what's happening, creating more of a mood, but isn't really integral to the motion itself. So like, what if we took our little white box and pretended like his text were, kind of like appendages of sorts, and they could move somewhat independently? Maybe he'd look a little bit more relatable, a little bit more energetic and lifelike. He will, because I've done this already. That's where these slides came from. So to do that, to add some secondary motion, I'm going to add one more set of keyframes. Basically, a version of our slide in. It's just a little bit shorter. I changed my first y value to be 80, so it's moving a smaller distance. And I'm going to end up making that actually start a little later too, kind of stagger the animations a little bit. But that's all I've added there. And then I'll go and add that animation to my headings and my paragraphs. So each of my text items is going to have that shorter animation, and they're going to have a little bit of a delay. There's some extra variables in there because of CodePen, but you can pretend the global delay is not really there. And then when we put those in, I guess something looks a little bit more like that. We're like, oh, he's got even more energy. He's a little bit more relatable and lifelike, and I'm sort of getting this happier feeling about my reservation to go drink tea with cats. There's at least like 2 other people that think that's cool. You can come with me. And then as a very last step, I know I said I was only going to do 3, but this is a very important last step. Speed the whole darn thing up. When we're working on animation of any motion on screen and we're designing it and like just nitpicking it and deciding exactly what every little pixel and millisecond should do, we look at it really, really slow. And the time it takes to read that motion as someone seeing it for the first time is like an itty-bitty, tiny, tiny fraction of what it took us to obsess over that. So essentially, whatever the duration of your animation is, cut it in half and then possibly half again, and then it'll probably be fast enough. So back to a couple technical things. That was sort of the design half of it, of like how to really get some messaging with your motion. And I mean, if we can pull that off in CSS, imagine what you can do with like more capable programming languages. CSS can actually, it can really hold its own, despite its strange, weird, secret syntax. And browsers are really starting to just treat CSS animation as like more of a real thing that people are doing. They're starting to acknowledge that there are people like me out there writing CSS animation, doing it a lot, and who would like really appreciate some ways to debug their work. I don't know, I hear that's kind of cool. For the longest time, up until probably about the last 6 months or so, if you made a mistake in any of your animation code, by the nature of CSS, if a browser saw a line of CSS it didn't understand, it would just skip it and ignore it. So if you made like any of the typos I did and you didn't have an audience to tell you, you would save that to your website and you would see nothing and be like, there's no errors, no, just nothingness. So you're basically left to write your own debugging tools, which might sound like fun. It's not. So browsers have thankfully started picking up on this and making some for us. Chrome has this awesome thing that's actually in Chrome proper, where you can play, pause, and slow down all the animations on a page globally. It is so amazing. It is like the best thing ever. It saved me so many hours of work. It only works on CSS animations and transitions and animations using the Web Animation API. Mostly I just told you that so I could say animation like 27 times in 2 sentences. It doesn't work with JavaScript animations, but with JavaScript you get like errors and you can log things to the console, so you're fine. Firefox also has a similar tool where they have some play and pause, and they actually separate out some animations as well. So if you're a Firefox fan, you are also totally good. This one is definitely in the Firefox developer build. It's probably in Firefox proper as well. I don't really use Firefox. The people on the other side of the office do, though. I'll ask them sometime. Chrome has also added a cubic Bezier kind of like inspector. This one's only in Chrome Canary right now, so it's probably a couple versions before it gets to Chrome proper, but like with the rate browsers are going now, that's probably like tomorrow. Anyways, yay, browser jokes. I'm like, should I cut all those out? Nope, they're gonna come out anyways. But you can hover over any of those like ease in keywords, any of those cubic Beziers when you're in the developer tools. You mouse over any of those in the inspector, and it'll give you this little pop-up and show you which curve you're using. Give you some other options of nice, like pre-done options if you'd like them. Some of the keywords and other things. You can even like arrow through them. It's great, and you can edit them too. You can drag those handles, get yourself new easing, and it shows it to you both in a motion graph and kind of a frame-by-frame circle onion skin thing. It's super helpful, and you can actually do what we were doing, testing different easing and seeing how it looks in the browser itself. Just keep playing it over and over, change your easing. You don't even have to like open a code editor. It's great. And what this is all leading up to for Chrome is this animation timeline that's coming soon, which I think is just kind of possibly the best thing ever. It's going to give us a little bit of indication of exactly what animations are taking place, their duration with that black bar, and then a little bit of a curve of the motion that they're using as well. So you get all that information about these animations on a page right in the developer tools. It's so awesome. This is technically pre-Chrome Canary, but if you really want to check it out, I know a sneaky way to do it, and I might tell you. Yeah, so, I mean, this stuff it's really great that this has all come up in the last 6 months. The tools that we have to be able to do this have just improved so much. It's like, it makes it so much easier because we can actually see what's going on, both edit and create in the browser as well as debug, which is a huge, huge time saver. And it's really nice to see the browsers kind of like legitimize CSS animations in that sense. And for them, it's because they're going towards this greater future web animation spec, which is also wonderful. But I love all of this stuff. I think it's really great. So hopefully through all that, I've convinced you. I'm like, how long is this video? Goodness. They're showing 3D. Stop talking. So hopefully I've convinced you guys that CSS animation is something you might want to look into or do more of, or if you tried it before, you want to give it a try again. Lucky for you, I sort of really like teaching people about CSS animation, and I really like talking about it, in case you haven't noticed. I have a resource page on my site that lists off a bunch of things for training about CSS animation, a lot of articles about motion theory, how to make UI animation that looks good, feels good, all that kind of stuff. Basically a longer version of what we talked about today. So that's some stuff to check out. I also have a video screencast thing that I've put together where I post tutorials of CSS animation and also review other UI animation on the web, talk about what it is they're doing, why it's good, and what makes it good. Lots of opinions and stuff. It's pretty fun to kind of talk through these things and say why they do things well or not. And if you're super into CSS animation specifically, I wrote a tiny book about it. Basically, if you've ever read the CSS animation spec or looked at it and you're like, these are not words, what are you talking about? That does not make sense. I wrote this little book to actually put those into normal human words so we could actually understand what they're saying, because they don't use, they make stuff up. So this is the actual readable English version of it. Lynn's read it and she liked it, so it has to be good. Everyone's mentioned Lynn on stage, so I figured I had to do it too. So that's a bunch of stuff I put together if you want to learn more about CSS animation, and I'm totally up for talking about it as well anytime. Yeah, and thanks so much for listening to me and having me at OpenVis. It was really great.